Hi and welcome to this session. This video's topic will be 3D printing and its history in a quick glance. So let's hop under the roots of the thing. The idea of 3D printing has always existed, but the idea to do additive manufacturing, it only came into life in 1980s when Mr. Hideo Kodama applied for a patent for his method of additive manufacturing. His idea was to create 3D plastic models with photo-hardening thermoset polymers, where UV light was controlled with a pattern. He filed for a patent for his invention, but there was lack of interest on his research about the matter and the patent rights were then abandoned. In 1984, French researchers Alain Lemaitre, Olivier Dewitt, and Jean-Claude André filed for their patent for stereolithography process. The application wasn't seen business potential, and because of that, it wasn't approved. But in the same year, in USA, there was a gentleman called Chuck Hull who filed for a patent for his own stereolithography system. He got the patent and he founded his company in the following years. His company was called 3D Systems, which is one of the leading 3D printing companies nowadays. In 1987, the first commercial SLA machine was developed, the SLA-1, and as you can see it here, it's quite complex in hardware compared to the ones nowadays, and it's quite big in size compared to the build volume of the machine itself. In 1988 and 1989, Scott Crump developed FFF method called fused filament fabrication, also known as FDM or fused deposition modeling. And he applied and got the patent for it. In upcoming years, he commercialized it and created his company Stratasys. In 1989, Charles Descartes developed SLS Technology, which stands for Selective Laser Sintering. That pretty much wraps the 80s. And you can notice that most of the major 3D printing technologies, like the big ones, were developed then. When we move on to the 90s, we can see development of these technologies and their first available printers. In 1990, first SLS machine for commercial use was released, the SLS 125. This was developed by Desktop Manufacturing. Charles Descartes, the inventor of SLS, was working with this company at the time. And you can see the machine here. It was pretty bulky looking machine. In 1991, Sgc Technology was created by Cubital Ltd, an Israel company. Sgc means solid ground curing, which was a very complex method of 3D printing, and it took years to develop, and because the development started in the 1980s. It consisted of using liquids for the printing material and then using wax and then cutting the wax and etc. It was very complicated. Also, LOM was developed in the same year. LOM means Laminated Object Manufacturing. It was developed by Helisus. This technology uses paper or plastic or metal laminates to create objects. So it lays sheets of materials on top of each other and then cuts the shape out of them. And in 1992, the first commercial FDM printer from Stratasys was introduced. It was called 3D Modeler. Also in 1992, a second commercial SLS printer was launched. It was called SinterStation 2000. The launch was done again by DTM, Desktop Manufacturing, which Charles Descartes, the creator of SLS Technology, worked in. In 1994, a method of printing wax came into life by Solidscape Incorporates. So you could now build up wax prints for molds and such. Also in the same year, G Corporation was founded, and in the upcoming years, G Corporation launched their line of printers, jet printers. These used binder jetting technology. So they used kind of like glue with an inkjet head and gypsum powder. So they used the glue to harden the gypsum powder into shape. In 1995, first ever DMLS 3D printer was launched. This machine could print metal parts out of metal powder. It was called EOSint M250, developed by EOS, a German 3D printing company. You can see the machine here. And then in 1997, first ever 3D printing service was launched. It was called Materialize. But throughout the 90s, every 3D printing technology was polished and developed to be even more precise, to be even more faster than ever before, and to be bigger. So the build volume for each printing technology was raised or grown. When we hit the 2000s, things started getting interesting because everything started to get bigger and the technology started to get more precise and etc. But new technologies were again launched in the 2000 to 2010. For example, EBM was launched. With EBM means electronic beam melting. It was another method to create metal prints. And also for older technologies showed new products in the start of the 2000s. There was a 3D printer for SLA technology developed, which had the build volume of 2 meters by 0.8 meters by 0.7 meters, which meant that you could create huge parts compared to the printers and print volumes from the last decade. But something major happened in 2005, because in 2005 a RepRap movement started. It was started by Dr. Adrian Powder, and the idea of the whole movement was to create a machine that could replicate itself. So once a machine is finished, it can print parts for another machine, not all of the parts, but most of the parts. And also in 2005, the same year, first ever accurate color 3D printer, the Z510, was launched by Z Corporation. This also was based on using binder jetting technology. And in 2007, the first ever RepRap printer was shared to public, the Darwin. This was an FDM machine. You can see it here. It looked a bit self-made, like do-it-yourself. And when we hit beginning of the 2010s, we could see the fall of FDM patents, fall of SLA patents. Pretty much many of the patents that were applied for in the 1980s started to go public domain. So this happened in 2009 for FDM technology, and immediately in the same year a company named MakerBot was founded. And in 2010, Ultimaker showed its first printer, the Protobox. It's shown in the left, and on the right is the Darwin RepRap printer. So in 2010s you could see this era where 3D printing started to become more of a trend. I mean more like a everyday. No. So in 2010s you could see that the 3D printing started to go more and more public. So it started to trend, so to say. Not in the beginning of 2010. I mean in the 2018, 2019. Or even earlier, a few years earlier than that. So that it became really something that consumers could easily get their hands into. Because earlier in 2009, in the 90s, 3D printers were very expensive and there wasn't any printers available to the consumers. Because everything was for corporations and companies and it was very expensive. In 2012, Prusa Research was founded. And it was founded after working with Prusa i3 Mendel, which was part of the RepRap movement. It was a mix from this RepRap printer called Mendel. The first commercial printer for Prusa Research was launched in 2015. The whole decade from 2010 to 2020, you could see the major developments in 3D printing technologies. The older ones were fine-tuned and made more precise, and the build volume was enlarged, and they were made way more achievable by consumers for dropping down the prices and such. And many new companies were founded in the last 5 years, like 2015 to 2020. Many companies were founded just to create 3D printers. So, on the next topic, what about the situation now? That was a glimpse on the history, and in 2020. What about the situation now? How's everything going? Well, the market has been growing. The understanding of the subject has grown a lot. People have understood the possibilities of the use of 3D printing. They have come up with a lot of new ideas on how to benefit out of it, which is obviously a good thing, not a bad thing at all. The usage of the 3D printers has risen a lot. Many startups that focus on providing either printing services or designing, or even the companies themselves have gotten a 3D printer to help with their production, to prototype their products before their final manufacturing, for example with an injection molding machine or CNC'd. And 3D printing services, like just mentioned, have expanded. A lot of new players in the field, even home users have started to provide services because of the low price of FDM 3D printer. This has piqued the interest of many new hobbyists that have bought a 3D printer. New business models have risen. Besides the printing services, people offer now 3D modeling and make their living out of that. They do what they love, which is 3D modeling, and make their favorite fantasy characters come into digital life, which then again interests other hobbyists who buy these models for themselves to be 3D printed. Metal 3D printing has taken a huge step forward as new materials have been developed. Even titanium, copper, tool steel can now be printed, which gives a tough fight compared to the traditional CNC machining, because you can make shapes that you can't with normal manufacturing methods. I mean subtractive manufacturing methods. Speed of the printers have improved. There are SLS or DMLS machines now even with dozens of lasers, which speeds up the process quite a lot. And also in the wet photon polymerization sector, there's a huge step up in the speed, as now a layer can be cured in less than 2 seconds. So that wraps up the short glance to the history and the situation now. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.